So, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Gail, and I help with programming and life cycle events at Beth Tikva Synagogue. And we're pleased to welcome tonight Sara Dimerman to help us walk through the challenges of parenting during this pandemic. Sara is also known as Help Me Sara. She's a psychologist who has been counseling teens, parents, and families for over 30 years. Over the years, she's helped clients through periods of depression, anxiety, workplace, school, and home life stressors, complex family and sibling relationships, difficult dynamics as a couple, including issues around intimacy, sexual relationships, and infidelity. She helps her clients through separation and divorce. Sara frequently appears on radio and television and is host of the Help Me Sara show, heard Thursday mornings at 11 a.m. and 9 p.m. on Saga 960 a.m. News Talk Radio, and that's out of Mississauga. She has also written 5 books related to issues that are often raised by her clients. The last one was written in 2019, and it was about helping parents and teens transition from high school to post-secondary education. So I'd like to welcome Sara. Let me unmute you. Sara, you're muted.
Okay, am I unmuted now? Okay, perfect.
Yes.
Okay, excellent. Welcome everybody. This is my first Zoom presentation. I mean, I do Zoom with my clients and other kinds of video platforms every day, all day. But in terms of bringing a group of people, I've attended Zoom presentations many times, but this is the first time I'm actually presenting on one. And actually, I mean, I think this is part of going through the pandemic and needing to meet everybody this way. But in some way, I'm not sure how you guys feel about it, but I kind of liked not having to leave my house to come and join you tonight. So I try and look for some of the positives as we navigate through this pandemic. And one of them is when I look outside and I see all the snow on the ground, I'm glad that I don't have to drive to work. And it's when it's cold outside, it's nice to meet people in their homes and even see into your homes. I get a glimpse of the way that who you are, and often you feel more comfortable that way too. As Gail mentioned, I'm a psychologist and an author and have a radio show once a week. I should also mention that I'm also married and a mom of 2 daughters myself. So my youngest daughter is 21 years old and she's at Queen's University in her final year of psychology. And my older daughter is 29 and she's a graphic designer. And she's currently working from home, even though she works for a big organization. Like everybody else, she's working from home. And fortunately, both of my daughters are actually managing quite well through this pandemic. My younger daughter actually really appreciates not having to go to class early in the morning and have to walk to all of her lectures. I was saying to Gail earlier that I think that's because she's already had 3 years of university life. So this year is a bit more relaxing. But for those students that are just starting out this year, it's been a difficult time. And I have a lot of teenagers and university students in my practice, and I know how difficult it's been for them to transition to having to be online all the time. And then my older daughter is enjoying working from home, but like most people is finding it to be somewhat socially isolating because she lives alone. So I think that everybody, no matter what age you are, whether you're a parent of young children, whether you're a single person, whether you're grandparents, everybody has in some way had a difficult time in many ways navigating through COVID and this pandemic. And I think, I see all different ages in my practice. So I work with a lot of parents of newborns, a lot of parents of school age children, a lot of parents of university age children, and I work with a lot of grandparents too. So I feel fortunate that I'm able to see people across their lifespan, and it gives me bird's eye view in terms of what's going on. And I also feel fortunate that I have the radio show because I get to interview a lot of really interesting people. And I learn as I'm interviewing, but I also feel that I'm really offering people a lot of really important information and trying to focus on what's going on COVID with the experts that I speak to. And so I find, that the people that seem to be having the most amount of difficulty are parents with young children. Parents with children who are newborn, for example, are concerned that they're raising their newborns and their toddlers in a socially isolated environment, and they worry about their socialization because they're not able to get together. Especially if you have an older child and a young child, you know what it felt like when you had your older child and you were able to go to mom and tots groups or dad and tot groups, and you were able to meet other parents at indoor playgrounds and things like that. And now you're not able to do that. So that's been very difficult. I think even people that are having babies now, they often are referred to as COVID babies. And I think for years to come, people will be doing study to see how our COVID babies may be different to babies that are born not during a pandemic. But also, my heart really goes out to those of you who have children that are school aged, because I think especially if you are, whether you're a stay at home parent or if you're a working parent, I think that can be almost equally as difficult, because if you're a stay at home parent, you at least look forward to your children going off to school during certain hours, usually 9 to 3 or something like that. And that's the time that you get whatever you need to get done. So whether it's your errands, grocery shopping, housework, catching up with friends, all that kind of stuff. That you're not able to do right now with your kids being at home if they are home. And if they're at school, there's other worries that you're contending with in terms of what they're being exposed to. You're worried about them wearing masks all day, perhaps. You're worried about the socialization. You're worried about what they're touching. I'm hearing about there's no more cubbies for kids that are a little bit older. So where are they going to put their boots and their coats all day? All those kinds of worries. And then if you are a working parent, it's even harder because now you may have kids at home and you're juggling the work that you have to do. And that can really be difficult, because what I hear from parents and educators is that it's not been easy to be able to supervise your children and manage their schoolwork and make sure that they're attending on the computer all the time. I mean, as parents, we don't want our kids to be on the computer all the time, and now we don't have a choice. So that's been really, really difficult. Also, during the pandemic, there's not been a lot of opportunity for breaks. So parents having breaks from their children. I just recently wrote an article that it'll go out soon about couples during COVID. And I think that if you are part of a couple, you'll understand. I say that in my article, I say that, I used to talk to retired couples who would talk about how difficult it is sometimes to be with each other all the time and just kind of getting in under each other's feet and in each other's way. And now I'm hearing similar stories from couples. And so patience may be less, your fuse may be shorter. And so there may be more fighting as a couple. And that, of course, is going to impact how you're parenting as well. And I think everybody just feeling more isolated, not being able to get out, not having downtime, not being able to meet a friend for coffee, not being able to just go shopping on your own. All those kinds of things have been very difficult too. And so, but I'm not telling you anything that you don't already know, because I think everybody, this is common knowledge now in terms of what's going on. And certainly in my practice, I have never, ever been busy. I've been in practice for 30 years, and I just cannot accommodate all the people that are coming. Somebody called me today who I hadn't seen since 2012. So I just think that it's a reflection of how, even if they're not speaking to me specifically about the pandemic, any issues that they may be experiencing, whether it be anxiety, depression, stress, conflict in their relationship at home, issues around parenting, everything has been magnified by going through the pandemic. But what I'd really like to focus on over the next little bit is to come up with some strategies. So I've come up with 10 strategies, or 11, I think, strategies of things that you can do to try to make things a little bit better. Because as I said, you already know what I've already said. So let's talk about some things that could help you along the way. Some of these will sound very commonsensical, and often they are, but sometimes if you hear me put it in a certain way, you may hear it in a different way for the first time, and it may just be something that you say, yes, I really need to think about that some more. So top on the list, and whatever you read nowadays, you'll see practicing self-care is so important. And I know that when we talk about self-care, we often think about things like go and take a bubble bath, or relax and read a book, or make yourself a cup of hot chocolate and enjoy that. And those things are important. And I know that taking a bubble bath can feel really, really good. But I'm talking also about making sure that you're getting enough sleep. And I know that we struggle with our kids. I mean, I know, I'm not sure what the ages are. I know, Gail, you said it's across the board, but parents tell me all the time that especially like anywhere from 11, 12 upwards, and especially as your kids get into older teenagehood and into young adulthood, they are up until 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. And especially if they're not having to get up early in the morning to go to class, there is it's like a 24-hour like clock. They don't even, it's sometimes they reverse night and day, even especially if they're going to lectures that are taped that they can listen to afterwards, they can make up their own schedule. So, and it's interesting because my older daughter, one of the things that's happening a lot with university students and even older children that are living away from home is that they're actually coming home to spend time with their families more. So even my 29-year-old who's single will come home and spend a week at home with us just because she can do her work from our home as easily as from hers. And it's interesting because she works so much harder from home. She's literally getting up at 9 and going straight on her computer and not getting off her computer till 9 or 10 at night, and barely taking breaks for lunch. And if she is, she's taking her food to her computer. And who would have thought that as a parent, I'd be telling my child not to work so hard? You know, we tend to think of wanting our children to work hard, but and then when I tell her that, I look at myself and I wonder what kind of role modeling I'm doing, because I've never worked as hard. And as much as I love what I do, I know that it's so important because the boundaries between home and work, and especially because I don't have the responsibility of children living in my home right now, they're coming in and out. But for the most part, I'm not responsible for young children. And so I can devote more time to work. But even for my older children, I'm modeling not being good to myself by working so hard. So we really need to think about what we're modeling in that way. And so, you know, along with taking that bubble bath, of course, you know, getting enough sleep is important, and getting exercise is really important. And I have parents who'll say, I can't even find 20 minutes in the day to get on the bike, you know, or to go on the treadmill. My child's yanking at me, you know, once I've been on for 5 minutes. And I know that's really hard. But if you have a partner, or if you have somebody that can be with your kids, or even if you want to put your child in front of the TV for half an hour, nothing wrong with that. Just take that time and slot it into your schedule, because sometimes, you know, when you exercise, you release endorphins, which can make you feel good, and that can really keep you going. Eating healthy foods, making sure that you're getting enough of the proper foods is all part of practicing self-care. So that's one strategy that I can't emphasize enough, is to make sure that you're taking care of yourself. And part of that is also trying not to overextend yourself. I know as parents and grandparents, we tend to feel guilty a lot of the time. You know, we always feel like we should be super mom or super dad or super nana or super grandpa. And we need to be doing everything. And sometimes we don't put ourselves first. And of course, you can't when you have children most of the time, but you need to put yourself first some of the time. So if you've been with your child or children all day supervising schoolwork, and then there's more work to do, so homework, so work after work, and you've had enough and you need to get dinner done and you need to get laundry done and all that kind of stuff, you know, it's not going to be the end of the world if you don't do homework. And I think that teachers are being very flexible right now in terms of what can be done, especially for the kids that are learning online. And so, you know, I don't think that it's going to put your child at a complete disadvantage if you don't do homework once a week or something like that. So really try not to overextend yourself, and to be able to say, you know what, I'm really tired, I just need to take a break, or do something more relaxing. Instead of doing formal homework, sit down and read a book together or something like that. So you're still engaging in something that could be perceived as being more productive, but you're not extending yourself as much. The other thing I wanted to suggest is to have regular family check-ins. And part of that is checking in as a whole family. You know, statistics and studies have shown that families that eat dinner together actually create much stronger family units. I talk to families where that doesn't happen, where mom or dad is, if they are working outside the house, or even before COVID, if they were working outside, maybe they're coming home much later. Mom and children are eating together without, or mom and dad are eating later, kids are eating earlier. And I know that sometimes you can't help that if your children are really young or on a totally different schedule. But especially as they get older, as much opportunity as you can to eat dinner together is really wonderful. And that's part of a family ritual that you can keep going during the pandemic. And that's really great. So when I say family check-ins, it's about when you're together, like when you're eating dinner or something, to talk about your days, but also to talk about how are you feeling? Like, what's going on? How are things different before, and how are things different now than they were before? It's interesting because, I'm just going along, working, doing my thing. My husband's doing his thing. He's also working part-time from home and part-time in an office. And we had an interesting discussion a couple of weeks ago, and he shared with me that he was having a really tough time with COVID. And we talked about how, because he does the grocery shopping, and that for him is something that he really looks forward to, going out and meeting people and chatting and that kind of thing. He's a social person. He's an extrovert. So he really loves being out and being around people. I'm more of an introvert that loves being with people one on one. So I don't have as much of a hard time being at home all day working. I don't need it as much as he does. But checking in with him and understanding what he was going through and how it was different to what I was going through, even though I hope to be in tune with people, I hadn't really thought about it until we had this discussion. So really understanding, acknowledging that for some family members, their experience of COVID is going to be very different to yours. Everybody is responding to it somewhat differently. And the same is true for children. I have families that I speak to, the parents, where they have one child who's going to school and one child who's studying at home. And I'll say, I'm curious, why is that happening? And they'll say, well, my one child is incredibly social and just, is thriving by going back to school. And we have to kind of weigh out the risk and reward. And for him, it was really important to be back in a school environment, and he doesn't have a problem wearing a mask. And then they might say, but my other child may have health issues, or my other child really hated wearing a mask, or didn't want to be confined by the rules that they were putting into effect at school. And so we decided that he would stay at home. And so I think that's okay too. I think you got to look at how everybody is and how they're responding to this and them and what works best. So as I say, checking in as a family, checking in as a couple, even checking in with yourself to figure out, how am I coping? We tend to keep going and chugging along and putting on our bravest face, and everybody says, how are you? I'm fine, but really when you sit down, you realize that there are times when you are feeling sad about what's happening. There's a sense of loss, change, uncertainty. All of those emotions can be prevalent. Frustrations, fatigue. We talk a lot about COVID fatigue, which a lot of people are experiencing, even anger at how things have changed. And even within families. I mean, I spoke to a dad recently whose whole family has stopped talking to him. In fact, him and his wife are about to separate because is he thinks that the COVID is a complete conspiracy and that we're all being conscripted. And it's created such a huge wedge between himself and his two daughters and his wife that their marriage fell apart. Now, I'm sure there were things going on even before then, but I think even within families, even between couples, if, for example, you're more concerned about how things are taken care of when they come in from being shopped. You may want to wipe things down. Your spouse may not think that's as important. Or when you're out together, you may constantly be nagging at your partner to make sure that he or she is sanitizing their hands, whereas they may not think that's so important, or they might just forget about it. So it's created a lot more conflict and a lot more division within families and between couples. And so, as I said, you have to acknowledge children's differences and to try to put yourself in other families members' shoes, even if you're not experiencing it in the same way that they are. The other strategy that I'd like to suggest is planning safe family excursions or adventures. So one of my friends did such an amazing thing for Halloween. She called me and she said, "Do you mind if I use your mailbox?" I said, "Sure." I'm not using it. She said, "I'm going to put some stuff in it because I'm going to take my kids on a scavenger hunt." So I thought she meant she was going to take them in the neighborhood and she was going to have clues. But no, she actually had clues that took them all around Thornhill and North York. And so they had to come up with the answers to the clues. But as they did, they would go and look in different people's mailboxes, or maybe she'd hidden something under a rock. But she was able to still allow them to enjoy what they had enjoyed in previous years with some creativity. Another friend drove through around Halloween as well. She drove through a pumpkin patch in Milton that was all lit up. So I know that the zoo had been open. I'm not sure if they're open currently, but they were during the lockdown last time. They were allowing people to drive through in their cars. The Van Gogh exhibit also was often people were driving through in their cars. So there are things that you can do. Even I know a lot of people are nervous about renting go to hotels or even chalets and things like that. But if you feel comfortable with that, being able to go away as a family, just even to have a change of pace or a change of environment for a few days, maybe there's a hot tub, maybe there's something unique to the place that you're going to, just to give yourselves a bit of a break. And then also, as I mentioned, maintaining some sense of normalcy and tradition. So whether it be eating dinner together every night, or if you have Shabbat dinner together once a week, trying to maintain those traditions, because I think we're all looking for some kind of familiarity or normalcy in our lives. And so being able to maintain some of that is really important too. And the kids really appreciate that as well. One of the things that I noticed that, I've always tried to be this kind of person anyway, but especially during COVID, at the beginning, I was writing on Facebook every day, I think for about 30 days. I tried to find something positive, and I don't mean to not acknowledge people who are going through a difficult time. I acknowledge that, but also to think about possible positives as we go through this, especially at the beginning during lockdown, how we would spend more time with our families and maybe playing games that we hadn't played in a long time and things like that. But even today, when I woke up this morning, as many of us did, we took photographs of what was outside the window. The sun was out. It looked like a fairy tale. It looked like a winter wonderland. As many of us looked out of our windows this morning and saw all the beautiful snow hanging on the branches, and trying to find and appreciate small and simple pleasures. A squirrel outside, squirrels chasing one another, the beauty in the snow. And I think so important, leading into my next strategy, is so important how we talk about COVID in front of our kids and in front of our whole family. Because if we focus on the all the negative parts of it, in terms of when will this ever end, how will this end, if we watch the news continuously and focus on all the people that are in hospital or the people that are dying, and our children hear us talk about that, or our grandchildren hear us talk about that, I think that it really has an impact on our families. And so again, we need to validate and acknowledge what they're feeling, but we don't want to be all doom and gloom. We want to tell children, if they ask things like, there are a lot of people working really hard to try and make the COVID thing. Everybody calls about the COVID thing. We try to make the COVID thing go away. And I think, certainly hearing about a vaccine and the possible release of that over the next few months has given people renewed hope. So it's really, really important how our children hear us talk about it, just how we're talking about it in general in our families. The other thing I'd like to suggest is the wonderful thing about technology is that we can do things like we're doing tonight. And part of connecting and part of hearing from other people is doing this kind of thing. So thank you to Beth Tikva for organizing this. I think it's wonderful. But also there, with the wonder of technology, you can go on YouTube, you can listen on iTunes or Spotify, you can download so many videos and podcasts. So every week, as Gail mentioned, I have a radio show, and then that radio show gets converted into a podcast. And a lot of my podcasts over the last few months have focused on topics around COVID. So, for example, I've done three uh, conversations or three podcasts with somebody by the name of Janice Lastman, who's a educational consultant. And each time we talk, she just has her finger on the pulse of everything going on with education and learning from preschool right through university. And so we just talked a few weeks ago, and she was talking about how things, like how a lot of the schools are now trying to transition kids who were learning online with separate school teachers back into the homeroom with their cohorts. And we talked about how that will be and how the teachers will be impacted by that as well. So those are really interesting podcasts to listen to. I also interviewed Ann Douglas, who is a well-known parenting author, on how to what was the, I think it was called How to Maintain Your Family's, or How to Help Your Family's Mental Health During the Winter Months. So we were acknowledging that during the winter, things can be different than during the summer when you can be outside and playing. Although, of course, during the winter, you can enjoy playing outside with your kids as well. And I also interviewed an old friend of mine who I was friends with when I was a kid in South Africa. He's a psychologist, Leonard Carr, and we talked about how to live with uncertainty, because I think a lot of us are living with uncertainty right now, and that's part of what makes this difficult too. So certainly feel free to listen to those. Those are all free podcasts and can be very helpful. And as I mentioned, just staying connected to others. I know that it's difficult, and at the end of the day, you may be so tired from homework and being with your kids and just keeping on top of everything that you may not want to even have a Zoom conversation with a friend. But even if you have a 10-minute phone conversation just to check in with one another, to see how you're doing, to just chat about things that you used to like chatting about, that's so important. Having these kinds of meetings, meeting up with family, if you can't meet up with them in person, to meet up with them virtually. And as I mentioned, there are so many resources for you as parents and grandparents, but there are also a lot of great resources for you to help your kids. So back when COVID, when we first went into lockdown, there was two producers approached me who were working on a series of kids animated kids series called Spike and Tootie. And Spike and Tootie are two animated characters who talk to kids about what's going on and why we're socially distancing and that kind of thing. So those, oh, my cat wants to come in here. Okay. They're wonderful. It was wonderful to work with them and to help collaborate with them in terms of helping them find the right questions that these characters could respond to. And I think as parents, sometimes it's difficult to know what to say, what age, when you can bring something up to your child, how honestly you should respond to the questions that they're asking. So sometimes if you watch that kind of a show together, and I think Sesame Street might have done something as well, sometimes watching those shows together as a family or with your children, or reading books. I know there are books that have come out for kids on COVID as well. Those can be great springboards to discussion about what's going on. And kids have amazing things to say. Oh, one of the things that I forgot to mention too is Janice Lastman in the last podcast talked to me about how important it is to give children a voice and to help them know that they're being heard, and also to help them be as independent as possible, because a lot of teachers, especially teachers of younger children, are saying that they're trying to maintain physical distance, but it's very, very difficult. But they are encouraging parents to maybe send clothing with their kids that they don't have to help them as much with. And Jana said, what she's recommending to parents is, instead of like having to get them to use zippers if they're struggling with that, to rather get them a coat that's one size bigger so that they can use like sweaters and just put their arms through. So those kinds of tips are really important, I think, when you're trying to help educators as well. Many educators are parents too. So they're struggling with not just being in the classroom and having to wear a mask full time, but also then having to go home to their own children. And a lot of my clients are teachers, so I hear a lot of their experience as well. So that's pretty much all I wanted to share in terms of what I had to say, but I would love to hear from other people in terms of what anybody's going through. If you have specific questions that you'd like to share, or even tips that you found useful that you can share with others, because part of this, I think, is also sharing with one another and being resources for one another too.
Um, I'd just like to mention that people can write their questions in our chat box, and I can read them to you, Sarah.
Okay.
And while we wait for that, I have a question.
Okay.
So, why is um, why is anxiety and depression rampant with in this generation of kids, and why has the pandemic sort of exacerbated all this? And what should we be looking for in our children?
Okay. So
Growing up, I don't remember. Maybe we just didn't talk about it.
right, I think that's a big part of it. I think that um, parents nowadays are so much more psychologically tuned into their children. And so I think, if I was growing up and I was showing signs of anxiety, I'm sure my parents would have said, you'll be fine, or they may not even have recognized what it was. Whereas now, parents, like the parenting magazines and information on the internet, I mean, wherever you look, there's information out there, and parents are so much more tuned in to what's going on. So I think absolutely we are talking about it more. I think, even in school, when students are being educated around health, they're talking about mental health a lot. I mean, we used to focus on physical health, and now mental health is very prevalent. There's also no more stigma attached to having any kind of mental health concern. So there's a lot of self-advocacy. Students, don't mind sharing the names of their therapists with one another. 11, 12-year-olds will say, I feel anxious and why. But I also think that we're living, aside from the pandemic, which of course raises anxiety to a whole different level. We children are living in an environment that's much more anxiety inducing than what we lived in. First of all, I grew up in South Africa, and I came here when I was 15. We didn't have TV till I was about 14. So anything I knew was what I heard from my parents pretty much. I was so shrouded. Now with the internet, our kids hear about world events before we do even. So they see it on their social media feeds. It may be catastrophized in certain feeds. The CNN may be on in the background all the time. So they hear about world events. They hear about conflict. People are much more vocal. Families are more vocal. Parents used to, talk about things behind their children's back. Now children are more included in conversations. So I think that the world has changed, and that has uh, probably created some more anxiety. Um, you know, Depression and anxiety often go very hand in hand, because often when you're anxious, you can feel depressed as a result of the anxiety. And often when you're depressed, you can feel anxious as a result of the depression. But I think, again, too, because of some of what children hear, they may feel that the world is not a great place to live in, or they may feel very overwhelmed. There's also more competition in education in terms of children, wanting to keep up with certain things or be competitive with their peers. So that can change things. And then, as you said, it's exacerbated by what's going on with COVID. So I'm not sure if that kind of answers your questions. You were asking also about symptoms. So, I mean, anxiety can take on many different forms. In really young children, it can even appear as stomach aches or headaches. With children who are a little bit older, you may see more of the typical symptoms like heart racing or feeling dizzy or feeling breathless, like in the form of a panic attack. You might, if a child's feeling like a low mood or depression, you may see a lot of crying or a loss of appetite. So those are kind of uh, the most common symptoms. But yeah, I think as parents, we have a much harder job watching out for all these things. I mean, I see a lot more self-injurious behavior, cutting behavior in young children and young adults, a lot of more suicidal thoughts. So just a different world. And even in terms of like Bell Let's Talk Day, so there's a lot of, as I said, a lot more talk about mental health and bringing it to the fore. But some parents might say, well, maybe we're encouraging it. But I always feel like that we won't encourage things in our children unless it's there. And by the way, I mean, anxiety and depression is also somewhat genetic. There's often a genetic factor. Uh, and sometimes it's also learned by what they see. And we as parents tend to be more anxious nowadays as well.
That's
So,
definitely true. We're all definitely more anxious, and it's hard not to pass that emotion that we're
right.
feeling on
So,
to our children.
so one of the things I would suggest, if as a parent you're finding yourself anxious, is to think about how you can work on that. So there's lots of wonderful strategies for dealing with anxiety. There's free programs. There's one called Bounce Back. There's CBT. There's just talk therapy with a therapist. There's lots of great mindfulness programs, even online. So finding ways to learn how to be in the moment and how to try to find like more of a grounding is really important if you can.
We have a question.
Okay, great.
Um, Sarah, what do you recommend to parents about children using computer games or social media too much? Or even parents who notice their children becoming addicted to social media and online games?
Yeah. That is such a huge that's an epidemic in terms of the use of. I mean, I don't think it's just for children. I think it's for us as adults too. The majority of us, myself included, are addicted to our electronics. I mean, I don't think I go more than 10 minutes before, without checking my phone unless I'm with a client. Having said that, I think the question was also geared towards social media and video gaming. And so I'm concerned about when I hear about children that are spending too much time on social media, and especially because I found that their self-worth, their confidence, their comparing themselves to other people, like TikTok, for example. A lot of young children are on TikTok. I think it's not a good idea for young children to be on TikTok because there's a lot of very sexual provocative images on TikTok that I think are beyond a young child. And also, I think that even for young teenagers who are comparing themselves to the girls on TikTok, that's not a good idea either. Having said that, it is part of the culture today. So I think as parents, we have to navigate it carefully. And I actually have a number of podcasts with experts that I've spoken to about the use of technology and how to work with the addiction. And I obviously, for me, I've always found that if you have a strong foundation with your child and you can communicate well with him or her, that the best approach is always talking to your child about your concern and trying to come up with collaborative agreements and sharing your concern rather than coming across as you cannot, or I forbid you to, or I'm taking your phone away and you can't have it till next week. Those are really not great methods in the long run because they don't solve the problem. I think we need to teach our children how to think rather than what to think. So making sure that if your child is on some social media, even if they're 14 or 15 years old, to be with them, to hang with them, to look at what they're looking at, And again, to try not to be judgmental about what you're seeing. So you don't want to say, oh, that's disgusting. How can you watch that? But you want to say things like, so what do you think about that person when you see a video like that? Or what do you think when you read that message on Twitter or on Snapchat or wherever you're seeing it? So I think being involved, and video gaming, it's tough. And especially now with kids needing to be on their computers all the time, if they're doing online learning, it's very hard because as parents, we've spent so much time trying to get them off their computers and now they're not. And they're also saying that they need to be on their computers to do work. And very often they're not doing work. So if you can set up ground rules or come up with agreements as a family when your kids are younger, that they kind of get into the pattern of adjusting to, then you got better luck than if you try to implement this when they're, say, 17 or 18 or older. So then I think the best bet is just to share your concerns, be honest, be curious. And I think CAMH, the Center for Addiction and Mental Health, was running, I'm not sure if there are any more, support groups for children that were addicted to technology. It's a real thing. It's a real thing for all of us, as I said. So it's tough, but I think the way that you approach it would be important.
I'm, as a mother of two teenage daughters, going through something that I find a little bit challenging, and I'm not sure if the other parents with teenagers or even tweens on this Zoom call can relate to. It's that I can't keep my children locked up in a room for months. Yes, they have their technology, but funny enough, they don't want to socialize with their friends through Zoom or Snapchat or whatever, because they've been on their computers all day and
Yeah.
they want real connection, which is actually kind of surprising.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to balance their mental health with their physical health.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm worried as a parent, am I doing the right thing? Am I doing the wrong thing? I mean, how many times can I say, sorry, no, you can't go see your friend, even though you can see them at school? So there's conflicting messages.
Right.
What's your advice?
Yeah. So it's interesting because it's funny, so many kids want to go to school now, which is it's just very cool, I think, because before our kids would say they didn't want to go to school. Now they want to go to school. In the same way, when your teenage daughters say, I don't want to talk to my friends on technology, I want to see them in person. I mean, maybe that is another of the positives of COVID, is maybe we're going to get back to wanting to be, it's like the forbidden fruit. It's so much more tempting. And as I mentioned earlier, I think you've got to weigh out this risk versus reward. I hear a lot of parents of teenagers tell me about this, and they'll say that their teenagers especially will come to them and say, but mom or dad, like, it's my mental health, right? And what parent is going to deny your child of their good mental health, right? So I think that it's true. I mean, I went this weekend. I went and visited my daughter on she lives not on she lives in a house at the university, and I went and stayed with her this weekend. Uh, and I know that obviously if kids are away at university, they're not. She says that she meets with the same group of people, that she sticks within her so-called bubble. I'm not so sure how. I think you've got to know your child. Like, if you know that they are, for the most part, um, concerned enough that they're not throwing caution to the wind and completely abandoning and not taking this at all seriously, then that's one concern. But if they are taking it seriously, if they know people who've gotten COVID, if they've heard about somebody whose family members may have died from COVID, they know what's going on. And I agree. I think that as a parent, you cannot keep your child locked up in their rooms the whole time, because it isn't good for their mental health. And I think that sometimes you just got to like pray that it's going to be okay. And so, I think that all of us are struggling with that in regards to how much is too much. And also, we're all monitoring one another, right? So there's a lot of judgment, there's a lot of supervision. I spoke to a mom recently whose son was invited to a birthday party, and there were going to be a group of kids there from the school, but one of the kids had a cough. So the two moms were talking amongst each other and saying, well, I don't think they should be having that birthday. He shouldn't be going to that birthday party if he has a cough. And so the moms got together, and then the mom who was having the birthday party ultimately canceled it. And and I think what should have happened is that the mom with the child who was coughing should have either taken her child for a COVID test or asked her child not to go, unfortunately. But I think, that's different. But I think that you children have to be around each other to some extent. And as you said, especially if they're together at school, then really what is the difference about being together outside of school? So you don't want to break the law completely, or you don't want to show your children that you are not following any kinds of rules, but you want to be reasonable about it.
Yeah, I mean, they can see one friend and they have to be outside. No one has been in my house since May. In fact, my kids over the summer turned our garage into a hangout.
Yeah,
They got very creative. The garage door was open. My daughter set up her own movie theater.
right.
So they did adapt. We
Yeah,
have a question.
Mhm.
For little children, let's say 6 or 7, especially boys, and I know boys are quite active. How do we, they need activities, but hockey or soccer are closed down. How do we, as parents and grandparents, help our kids in this respect? What can
Yeah,
we
because
do?
at 6 and 7, I mean, they have some understanding. I mean, that would be a great age, for example, to watch a show like Spike and Tootie with, to help them understand some of the things that are going on that they may have some grasp of, but not completely. And as you said, the kinds of the extracurriculars that they may have been involved in, like hockey, might not be there anymore. I know one mom who kind of turned her living room into like a play area. She bought like a one of those those tent material blow up things and with a tunnel and everything. And she just moved all the furniture to the side so that her kid could just run through that. So if you have the space for something like that, you may need to turn part of your house into an area where your children or your child can just let off steam. Or you may want to put a YouTube video on the TV and maybe do some exercise together, like jumping jacks or things like that, just to get him moving. So yeah, I mean, it's true. Children of certain ages, or maybe boys more than girls. I think there are some girls that are very active too, but it's certainly a lot more difficult to keep children that age busy and active. But as I said earlier too, on really, really cold days when it's like frostbite temperature, you're not going to go out. But children love going in the snow. And so going downhill tobogganing, or just making snow angels, or just running around. In fact, the last couple of weeks, there must be a family outside my backyard that have their children being at home doing online learning, because every day I hear kids outside, and I think it sounds so wonderful to hear that. It's like the summertime. And so I'm sure that they'll continue to be outside during the winter months. And and some families have gotten, if your kids are at home online learning, maybe you could even come together with another one or two families where they have same age children, and maybe that becomes your bubble. And that way those kids could be outside together, you know, letting off steam, because it's hard as a parent to want to do that all the time.
I think I'm going to unmute people.
Okay.
And if they would like to chat with you, Sara, ask some questions, or if they have any personal comments that they'd like to share with the group, if they feel comfortable, we can do that. Otherwise, I want to thank you very much for joining us tonight and talking about something, that's on the top of our minds right now, and how difficult it is to be a parent, a grandparent, and even to be a child during this
Oh,
pandemic.
100%.
So,
And if anybody, doesn't want to ask a question here,
sure.
but wants to ask it of me, you can write to me at info@helpmesara.com. And you can also go to my website, which is helpmesara.com.
So if you would like to unmute, you can. If anybody has a comment, wants to say anything, question.
Or even something that you found to be helpful that you'd like to share with the group that has changed things for you or helped your children or grandchildren. I know it's been especially hard for extended family members like grandparents, you know, and again, it's risk versus reward, because some grandparents will say, I don't care. Like, I want to see my grandchildren. And if it means I mean, it's difficult to say, but some grandparents may say, obviously, I don't want to get sick, but I also don't want to live this way. So each situation needs to be handled separately and uniquely.
I know, and it's especially difficult now as the city of Toronto, we're in a lockdown.
Right.
So we're supposed to stay home. And I know for me, I usually see my parents and my extended family every Shabbat dinner.
Right.
And we haven't done that since the weather turned cold. We were eating dinner outside.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
and we're tired of doing Zoom calls on Friday nights to replace Shabbat. So
Yeah, that's really tough.
Also, I'd like to make a comment that I was visiting online with a family of young children, and they bought something that I had not been aware of. I think it must be expensive. It's a material you put down, and your garage floor or your rec room floor becomes a skating rink.
Oh,
oh,
wow.
So for children who are really, this little boy was really into hockey. He's, I think, 8 years old.
Wow.
And he was being homeschooled at the time. So at recess, he would put his skates on and do skating and hockey in the garage.
Wow.
It was really interesting.
That is. I'd not heard that before. So thanks for sharing that.
that's a good idea.
Yeah.
One last thing, Sarah, have you seen a phenomenon called reverse parenting?
No, what is that?
I guess I coined the term. It's where we as children all of a sudden seem to be parenting our parents. Because
Well, yeah,
we
okay,
seem to be taking on the role of parent and looking after them.
Right, but that I've not heard the term reverse parenting, but parenting our parents is very common. It's something that our parents probably have a hard time with. I don't have parents anymore, but I know that those people who do have parents, you know, the parents don't like that. But people like adult children will say to me, well, I keep telling my mom, you know, she can't keep going out, she needs to stay at home, blah, blah, or doesn't keep socially distanced from us. And I think when it comes to like what inconveniences you or makes you uncomfortable, then obviously you would draw the line. But at a certain point, you've just got to say, I've got enough on my plate and I can't be managing her or his life as well. So, you know, it's a phenomenon before COVID as well. It's what happens as our lifespan, like in the course of the lifespan.
Okay. So thank you, Sarah, very much. And thank you everyone for joining us.
Thank you.
And if anyone needs to reach Sarah on a one-on-one basis, I'll be happy to share her personal information with you. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank
Okay.
Thank you.
Everybody.
Bye. Good night.
Good night.
Bye.